Some living in luxury, enjoying kickback money, while parents got their school fee. So all who like to make free money, and like to hold big birthday party, remember it's that security. So don't forget to hold some ID. National card, your driver's card, DSS card, food handler's card, medical card, insurance card. Madness in the yard, madness in the yard. We'll bring the voters card. The voters ID card, the voters ID card. They're pretty bad, they're pretty bad. The voters ID card, the voters ID card. They're pretty bad, they're pretty bad. Usa mate, usa saute, usa hele, usa houple. Uncle Frenchie, one of these days, you gonna use that ID. No!
Yes, hello, good afternoon. You are tuned to Q95 FM and welcome to Talk on the Block. Very interesting program. I'm your host, Sean Douglas. A very interesting program lined up for today. Very educational and informative program. We will continue with the theme of electoral reform, but today we'll discuss wider issues of governance in this country. My guest today, who I'll introduce in a while, is Justice Dr. Irvin Andre, attorney at law, practicing in Canada. In the last 48 hours, he has produced a document captioned Exploring Free and Fair Elections in Dominica. Before, you see the free and fair elections, in fact, having read through the Sir Dennis Byron report, I didn't see many references, if any, to free and fair elections. So it's interesting that Dr. Andre's paper talks about exploring free and fair elections. And the issue of free and fair elections is very important, it's very important. And I want to quote for you this afternoon before we actually begin from some experts in the field of the importance of elections in a modern liberal democracy that we claim to have here in Dominica. So elections are the bedrock of the system of what is called representative democracy that we have in Dominica, and indeed all the countries that, in CARICOM, the Commonwealth, and the OAS. And this Professor Pippa Norris, who is a lecturer at Harvard University and the University of Sydney in Australia, she explained the importance of elections in a research policy project. And she said, and I quote, well, quite simply, elections are the cornerstone of any form of representative democracy. If you don't have an election that works, then everything else often fails. Parliament, executive bodies, courts, participation in civil society, and free media. And she continues, when elections are failing or flawed, you find a decline in voter turnout. There can be many more peaceful protests and demonstrations. That's what she said, this professor from Harvard and Sydney on election. Then there's a report from the Global Commission on Elections, Democracy and Security, of which the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan contributed. And he spoke about the importance of elections to be conducted with integrity. And he said, and I quote here, for elections to embody democracy, further development and promote security, they must be conducted with integrity. Where elections have integrity, the bedrock democratic principle of political equality is honored. Citizens select their leaders and hold them accountable, close quote. Further, he goes on, where elections lack integrity, politicians, officials, and institutions are not accountable to the public, which is denied equal opportunity to participate in and influence the political process. I'll read that again. Where elections lack integrity, politicians, officials, and institutions are not accountable to the public, which is denied equal opportunity to participate in and influence the political process, close quote. Where elections, that's Kofi Annan again, where elections lack integrity, public confidence in elections will be weak and governments will lack legitimacy. In these areas, democratic institutions are empty shells deprived of the ethos and spirit of democracy, close quote. Further, he went on, elections with integrity are important to values we hold dear, human rights and democratic principles. So that was as Kofi Annan there. So before I felt it was important to read from what these experts have said about elections, free and fair elections and democracy, before I actually go on to introduce my guest here today, Justice Dr. Irvin Andre. And if you're just tuning in, this is Sean Douglas here. I have Dr. Andre. You're on Talk on the Block. We'll be here until 3 p.m. So today on Talk on the Block, we have Dr. Irvin Andre, who is no stranger to Q95 FM. It's indeed a pleasure to speak to this gentleman who has a wealth of knowledge, expertise, and experience in so many areas. So, Dr. Andre, it's indeed a pleasure to welcome you once again to Q95 and Talk on the Block.
Thank you very much, Sean. I hope that you can hear me, and I hope your listeners can hear me. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Wonderful. Let me thank you for inviting me to break bread with you in terms of education and in terms of this pressing issue that is so critical to Dominica's future. And let us hope that we can make a contribution and we could add to the wealth of knowledge in the possession of your listeners. And although the landscape appears bleak insofar as electoral reform is concerned, let us be mindful that this is the day the Lord has made. Let us be glad and rejoice.
Dr. Andre, I'm not sure you were able to listen to what I said earlier. I quoted from Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General. I also quoted from a professor from Harvard and Sydney, what they had to say about free and fair elections. I'm not sure if you'll want to, before I begin, to comment on these words of these distinguished people who I quoted a while ago.
Well, I certainly heard what you said, and they reiterate what we already know. I can indicate to you the added significance of free and fair elections in Dominica, over and above what these highly erudite folks have said. Obviously, electoral reform assumes a particularly relevance in Dominica. And it's unfortunate that to a significant degree, Sean Douglas, there are still many Dominicans who believe that electoral reform is the preoccupation of some select group of people, predominantly in the diaspora or disproportionately, the talented 10th, or persons who, quite frankly, are well-heeled, persons whose idea of hardship is exercising a choice between buying a Nike shoes or Tommy Hilfiger shoes, if there's such a thing. Persons whose idea of hardship is deciding whether to have a lobster dinner, Sean, as you normally do, and or a red bean soup inhabited by snout. And that election reform is not something that affects the daily struggles or the daily challenges of life. Unfortunately, that is very divorced from the reality. The fact of the matter is it affects our lives or the lives of Dominicans on the ground in a very fundamental fashion. Let me give you some background information which has been quoted in different fora in the last few days concerning Dominica vis-a-vis the other islands. For example, since 2000, Montserrat has changed its government 6 times. Bahamas, Haiti, and St. Lucia 4 times. Barbados, Belize, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago 3 times. Antigua twice, St. Vincent once, Dominica none. Now, the reasons why we have not changed our government since 2000 is clear. The evidence speaks for itself. But here are some of the reasons I would suggest. Widespread electoral fraud, bribery of voters, particularly those who have been flown into Dominica every election cycle to vote, absolute control of the Electoral Commission, the complicity of some officers in the police services in facilitating electoral fraud, the economic dependency on the electorate, on the political directorate, intimidation and victimization of those who do not support the government. The constellation of these factors, Sean, has created a pervasive fear in Dominica, whereby silence is embraced as a shield or shelter against state victimization. That's the sad reality. So the lack of true electoral reform is one of the main instruments to ensure that the state of affairs in Dominica continues without interruption. It affects one and all, rich and poor, healthy or sick, and even those who worship at the feet of the directorate. I mean, consider how profoundly Dominicans are affected in a very personal fashion of the lack of reforms and the consequent entrenchment of a party in power, which unfortunately and sadly has kidnapped the institutions of state and the financial benefits of members for the benefit of members of the political directorate. And here's the grim reality that many Dominicans have to contend with. Those who are trapped, for example, working, for example, in the National Employment Program, most of whom earn about $800 monthly. Many of these workers long to agitate for higher wages, but refrain from doing so out of fear of victimization. Many DLP stalwarts who have received apartments resist complaining about the stench from perennially clogged sewage systems for fear of losing apartments for which they have no title. The Public Works Department was closed down for the express reason of farming out the work done by the PWD to cronies, relatives, and foreign persons in Dominica. Financial aid from foreign NGOs, such as the World Health Organization, to relieve hardship is distributed in Dominica strictly along party lines. Victimization, whether in the public service, police services, financial institutions, or among bus or truck drivers, is now a way of life. Small business owners have been displaced by their foreign counterparts. Public service unions are forced to accept pay increases ranging from 0 to 1 or 2% over 3 years because their membership fear the retribution they would suffer if they exercise their constitutional right to strike. Healthcare institutions lack basic items such as paracetamol, toilet paper, chemotherapy, tetanus shots, and bed linen. Prices rise, the cost of utilities rise, there's no price control to relieve hardship, there's no relief from high construction costs. These are some of the collateral effects of the lack of true electoral reform, because it perpetuates a regime which has done precious little to alleviate poverty, to alleviate hardship, to alleviate difficulty faced by the majority of the population. Yes, those who publicly parade their their loyalty to the color red, receive pittances that certainly alleviate suffering. But in terms of meaningful change, in terms of minimal economic assistance, the lack of electoral reform affects and perpetuates these hardships in a very fundamental fashion. And who is the big loser? Dominicans on the ground, not those who come every 5 years or every election cycle based on tickets they received from the Lord on high to travel to Dominica to vote. They don't, because there are programs in their adopted countries which enable them to ride the tide of periodic hardship. So they come, they vote, they go back, they enjoy the fruits of a true working democracy and leave their compatriots striving and working hard just to get by. So, true electoral reform affects every Dominican, quite frankly, who is trying to make a decent living for themselves, their relatives, and their children.
Yes, good opening remarks, Dr. Andre. Dr. Andre, before I get on to the substance of your document, which has stirred a lot of discussion both here and indeed in the diaspora, I want to take us back a little bit to when Sir Byron was contracted to do this job, this consultancy in electoral reform, and what the Prime Minister at the time said. And listen very carefully. Afterwards, I will play a clipping from Mr. Linton on his response to saying that, well, let's hear Mr. Skerritt first, and then I'll play Mr. Linton afterwards.
And one of the things I would like to challenge Mr. Linton on is let us sign with the guidance of Sir Dennis a joint agreement that we shall respect the recommendations coming out of this process and abide by it. If he says he's very serious and sincere about electoral reform, let's sign this agreement. Let's sign this agreement. This game playing is not going to help him. It's going to help the country. And I can tell you, whatever recommendations are going to come out of this, I shall abide. I shall abide.
To be fair, I do not like the way that it appears Mr. Skerritt is stage managing this electoral reform agenda. But I have to recognize that Parliament makes laws for the peace, order, and good governance of the country. That's a constitutionally authorized responsibility. And so, given the role that the government has in the Parliament, nobody can tell the government who can come in to advise it on laws that are to be amended or passed to facilitate electoral reform, for example. So to the extent that that is what the government is doing, or the government wants to review everything that has gone on so far, even the recommendations that it requested from the OAS, from the Commonwealth, from CARICOM, it wants to review all those, it wants to review the existing laws, it wants to review even the amendments it proposed to the laws and so on. There's no problem with them contracting with Sir Dennis Byron or anybody else to come in to do that. I have a problem with the styling of the assignment and so on, but let Mr. Byron come in and advise the government, and hopefully he will be minded to work with the Electoral Commission, which is why I'm disappointed that there is no Electoral Commission at this point that he has been engaged to come in to do that assignment. So just be clear that the parliamentary opposition is not standing in the way of anybody's right to express themselves. The parliamentary opposition is just clear what its position is, but it is not a position where we are going to lie down and play dead, where recommendations will surface that are not in the best interest of Dominica and facilitate the Skerritt agenda of manipulating in Dominica for his own longer-term benefit. We're not in that. Anybody who comes in to do that is going to be called out for what they are. Mia Mottley, the current Prime Minister of Barbados, some years ago was retained by the Electoral Commission to come in and advise on changes that needed to take place with the legislation. And on behalf of Mr. Skerritt, Alec Lawrence in the commission, that's my understanding, trashed the recommendations of Mia Mottley because, of course, they did not want to move forward with electoral reform. The point of the matter is this: Mr. Byron is coming here, Mr. Byron will do work. But, for example, the people of Dominica are not in the mood to legitimize bribery and treating. But this government of Roosevelt Skerritt attempted to do that in the amendments that they proposed for the House of Assembly Elections Act. And let me be very clear. as the parliamentary opposition, we will be prepared to call out any recommendations from Sir Dennis Byron or anybody else that goes against the constitutional rule of law in Dominica, as the Labour Party has tried to do with previous amendments proposed for the House of Assembly Elections Act. So not because of his stature or his experience or the fact that he is well known and so on, that is not going to prevent us from being objective and fair and operating in the public interest to call out whatever we see that is not in the best interest of Dominica and the integrity of its electoral system.
Dr. Andre, first comment on Mr. Skerrit. He said, whatever it is that Byron comes up with, I shall abide, I shall abide. For a man who had for over 10 years rejected recommendations from the OAS, from CARICOM and the Commonwealth, all of a sudden he said, listen, whatever Byron says, in fact, he said initially, I will go straight to Parliament with it, not even any consultation. So comment on that first clipping of Mr. Skerrit made all these years ago.
God probably spoke to him. Many of these political operatives like to invoke God to justify ill doing. Now, here's the problem. So Byron is a legal luminary, quote unquote, but he is no electoral law expert. In fact, he has no expertise whatsoever. Now, bear this in mind. Those organizations and institutions that have collectively made in the past recommendations in terms of electoral reform, these are organizations that have real expertise in this field. Yet the reports were rejected. Mia Mottley was hired by the commission to give recommendations. We have yet to see what she recommended. So the Prime Minister had no interest in the reports or recommendations of organizations which had expertise in the field. The Prime Minister and his cronies, they had the benefit of seeing examples in the Caribbean regarding true electoral reform, whether from Jamaica, whether from Antigua, whether from Barbados, whether from Trinidad and Tobago or other islands. It's right there. And bear in mind one thing, we live in an era where with the pressing of an iPhone, you can get all the information you want involving any subject that you can conceive. So the whole question of free and fair elections or its components is hiding in plain view. There is no need or was no need to hire Sir Byron to prepare a report. He is not an expert. He may have a couple of friends in Dominica who were close to the Prime Minister. But that appears to be the justification why he was asked or tasked to come up with some recommendations which were palatable to the Prime Minister. In other words, recommendations which would find favor with the person who asked him to do a report. And that obviously is a red flag. And secondly, the Prime Minister is telling you, we will accept any recommendation made by this person who has no expertise in the field. What is the source of that confidence? What is the source of that arrogance? The answer is not blowing in the wind. The answer is clear. Because those reforms, those recommendations were preordained. You hear me? Sir Byron was not hired to provide any legal expertise on what is true electoral reform. He was hired to produce a recipe of reforms that were palatable to the political directorate. And hence the assertion that we will take whatever the man recommends and go to Parliament with it. He didn't do that with any other recommendation. Some recommendations had the blessings of Pastor Rodney and other civic-minded individuals. He had no confidence in those. no confidence in the OAS, no confidence in any CARICOM organization, no confidence in any UN organization. But he had confidence in what a legal luminary with no expertise in the field was prepared to produce. It tells you that something is rotten in the state of Denmark. That's what it tells you.
And of course, you heard Mr. Linton, very politically astute at the time when you think about it, that he said, listen, let us see what Mr. Byron comes up with.
Oh, absolutely. And that is just common sense. Before you decide to accept or reject or modify, you have to see the end product. But you are prepared to go with it. You are prepared to take it to Parliament and enact it into law because you are confident that the slate of proposals will reflect your own desires insofar as elections are concerned. And that, quite frankly, in itself is a damning indictment of this report. It was preordained, but not only that. I had occasion to see some drafts, and it's clear that to the extent that Sir Byron was the ultimate author of these reports, of this report, then changes were made to recommendations which reflected the gold standard of good practices insofar as electoral reform is concerned, to reflect the wishes and directives of the incumbent government. One would have thought that this report would be reflective of the considered opinion of Sir Byron, one which reflected impartiality, independence, the erudition which the man possessed. But it is clear that the ultimate report is nothing but a list of measures sanctioned and ordained and delivered on tablets of stone to Sir Byron. And Dominica is the biggest loser because it's Dominicans on the ground, not those who take the little money or the free passage to come and vote, who will suffer the most. And that is why this thing is so insidious.
It's now 1:28 in Dominica. You're listening to Talk on the Block. I have Justice Dr. Irving Andre. Before we take a break, Dr. Andre, you recall that Sir Byron was given this consultancy sometime in 2020, September or thereabouts. But in November 2022, with the report still incomplete, the Prime Minister announced the election date. Dr. Andre, if you were in that position, you had Byron's position to do that report, what would you have done in that situation? The Prime Minister gave you an assignment to fix the electoral system, but he went ahead and called an election, which surprised you. What would you have done, Dr. Andre, in that situation?
In my respectful view, what Sir Byron should have done is to say, Garçon, fini pisa. I want nothing to do with this. Because first of all, that decision was a repudiation of him. It was a fundamentally disrespectful decision to be made. And not only that, but it certainly violated that decision rendered by the CCJ in July of 2022, a few months before the declaration of the elections. And as of someone who was the head of that court, and as someone who, quite frankly, should have had some solidarity with his former judicial colleagues, he should have issued a public statement expressing his extreme regret as to that unfortunate development. Bear in mind, two university professors, UWI, actually wrote an article in the Barbados, one of Barbados newspapers, criticizing this decision to call a snap election, and for good reason, because it ran contrary to the whole retention of Sir Byron to produce a report which would serve as a guideline for future elections, to deal with the taints which the CCJ talked about in its July 2022 decision. But that in itself is evidence, not that we need any more, that the nature of this exercise was not to clean up the way in which Dominica has conducted elections over the last 3 cycles, but to legitimize, to justify, to normalize the manner in which those elections were held. You see? For him to do legally what he's been doing illegally. And every indication is that was the whole purpose of the retention of Subairan. And Sean, I don't know, you're a very learned fellow, you do a lot of research. You must have had occasion to read that letter, which Subairan sent to the Prime Minister. The only thing he forgot to mention is, my dear Dudu Shekakot, here is what I have delivered to you at your request. That's the only thing missing from the letter.
You're tuned to Talk on the Block. We'll take a short break and give Mr. Dr. Andrea a chance to maybe have a cup of tea or maybe some water, and then we'll be right back.
If you know your favorite store, dial it now. 612-1253. That's Mega Deals. You can rely on Mega for some real deals on name brand clothing and electronics. High quality, low price. We are a wholesale and retail store located in Calabishi, right on the main road. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram as Mega Deals Dominica. Like our page. Check out our stuff. Call us. Visit us. Would appreciate that. Come try it on. Love it. Buy it at Mega Deals. Your one and only online and brick and mortar store. Mega Deals is also on wheels. We make it convenient for your shopping. We deliver straight to your door. Email us at info@megadealsda.com. Rely on Mega Deals for some real deals.
The biggest art exposition is unfolding in the 767 Garden, New Jersey. Yes, you heard right. 767 Stuyvesant Avenue. Creative talents and industry of Dominicans living in the diaspora. Experience a colorful explosion of creative talents, music, artwork, handicraft, books and food created and produced by Dominicans living in North America. Artists and crafters, book writers, and more. DJ Falcon spinning the ones and twos. The expo with a difference. The Dominica Diaspora Jinping Band, a guest performer, will give you a taste of 767. There will be a health corner spearheaded by your own Dominican nurses living in the diaspora. The kitchen has a menu to dine for. So Rose Catering Services will feed your appetite with delicious crab apps, bakes and sausage, green bananas, stewed backs and necks. A well-stocked bar awaits you. Wear something Creole and come support the creativity of Dominicans living in the U.S. It's your own Dominican Diaspora Art Expo, uniting the masses on July 15th, 767 Stuyvesant Avenue, Irvington, New Jersey. The biggest summer event, New Jersey, July 15, 2023. The Dominica Diaspora Art Expo compliments Wayland Smoke Meats and Produce. 845-232-6202 for your smoke meats and fish in the U.S. And Rose Catering Services based in New York for your gourmet caterings, and in Roseau, Dominica for catering rental. See you there.
Auto Trade introduces Thrifty Thursdays. On the last Thursday of every month, get up to 20% discount of various items in the store between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. But wait, there's more. Also, look out for what Deal of the Day offer for an even bigger discount. You can't miss out on this real deal savings. So come to Auto Trade on Thrifty Thursdays. At Auto Trade, it's more than a vehicle, it's a relationship. Terms and conditions apply. This is Asa Banton, your Tropical Water Ambassador, with your hurricane tip for today. Determine your risk. Effects of hurricanes can be devastating and bring many hazards, including flooding, strong winds, heavy rainfall, rip currents, and rough seas. Be prepared and remember to stock up on tropical water.
In the Spotlight on Q95 FM radio, every Monday night from 8 p.m. In the Spotlight, featuring people from all walks of Dominican life, spotlighting their triumphs and tragedies, dreams, hopes, and aspirations, untold stories, touching the human and personal side of our people in politics, religion, sports, business, music, culture, the media, and more. Getting to know our farmers, public servants, youth, the ordinary Dominican. Listen to their stories. No limitations, no restrictions, no holds barred. In the Spotlight, we'll also spotlight interesting topics, issues, and relevant situations. Don't miss In the Spotlight on Q95 FM radio every Monday night from 8 p.m.
Yes, and welcome back to Talk on the Block. We have Justice Dr. Irvin Andre here this afternoon with us. Very interesting discussion in the first 36 minutes, and there's a lot more to come. Dr. Andre, you've, in your paper exploring free and fair elections, you have highlighted about 8 areas that, in your opinion, will allow Roosevelt Skerrit, quote, to conduct elections in the same manner that he has done before, but without any accusations of illegality or unlawfulness. And you went further, describing Byron's reforms as a Titanic of rusting reforms that will destroy Dominica's democracy and instead create a Skerritocracy with red carpets leading to mansions, banks, and incomplete or empty hotels. Let us focus on the areas, about 8 areas that you mentioned, I think starting with overseas registration of voters. Let's look at these areas one by one.
Cricket.
Yes, go ahead. We had a short mishap there. Go ahead, Dr. Andrew.
All right.
Did you hear my question?
Yes, you asked me to focus on the 8 areas of concern which I expressed as to why, in my view, Sir Byron's report falls far short of its mark, which should have been, in my view, the preservation of free and fair elections in Dominica. The first one is overseas registration of voters. If I recall correctly, the report recommends 4 areas where voters would be registered. Now, here's the problem. Who do you think will be registered to vote? Who do you think are being parachuted into Dominica to vote? Obviously, supporters of the Directorate. It's common sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes you think that providing for the overseas registration of voters will further the mark or the goal of free and fair elections? It will be done in a very partisan fashion. And if it is done with unrestricted, it will significantly dilute the vote on the ground. So that in and of itself is a major indictment of what is being proposed here. What about the second area of concern I expressed? Quote, no specific indication that paying for the air and sea passage of persons to come to Dominica to vote for the candidate or political party constitutes the offense of bribery. Why this omission? This has been the fundamental concern from patriots regarding Dominica's elections. In fact, persons were actually, ministers of government went on air saying that there is nothing wrong in Dominicans traveling from Guadeloupe and Martinique through the back door. It was said that that is part of our culture. In other words, here was illegality being sanctified as if sprinkled with holy water. There's just nothing wrong. That was what they were saying. And if the reports were true, in certain villages, police officers were escorting some of those persons to the polls. They were facilitating bribery and corruption in the electoral process. So how, without specifically indicating that that practice should be prescribed, is illegal? And sadly, Sean Douglas, there is legal precedent for him to have said so explicitly. In 5 minutes, I can give you the names of at least 5 cases that say so explicitly. So Byron even referred to the Hillsbury laws of England that says so. Mais parfait. He didn't say so explicitly. Why? Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Whose interest is that omission serving? So that's another red flag. as to what is happening here. What about my third comment? No meaningful limitation in electoral expenditure. Such expenditure can be increased at the whims and fancies of the Commission and Parliament. Sir Byron was suggesting $5 million to be spent by each party during what he called the reporting period. The reporting period is the period which commences when the elections are called. $5 million. But he said this is just a recommendation. The Commission can have a different perspective, and Parliament, quite frankly, acting on the Commission's advice, can increase it. Parliament can decrease it in theory, but we know that it will never be decreased, because it's in the interest of the Directorate to have as much spending discretion as they possibly could. So this recommendation is not a check on election spending. But secondly, Sean, there is no proposal with respect to spending before the commencement of the reporting period.
Up to a year before, that's when the real money is being spent.
But in the last, what happened in November or December 2022 is a perfect illustration that what is being proposed is of no effect. Because, Sean Douglas, a day or two after the announcement of the elections on about December 6th, you had not postcards, for God's sakes, you had billboards.
November 6th.
You had bands, November 6th, appearing as if by magic. So that expenditure had been done well before the report.
Yeah, things were on the port already. Yeah.
Well, there we go. So that what Sir Byron is proposing will not in any way, shape, or form limit that type of pre-reporting period expenditure, thereby making a complete mockery of what he's proposing, and he knows it. Third area, limited access to state media by opposition parties and no access to private-owned media. His limited proposal was that the opposition, well, I think at one point, well, in certainly a draft report, he indicated that the opposition involvement should be vetted by who? By the Electoral Commission. I don't want to say it too loud, because if I say it too loud, people will say, boy, that is not true. So Byron cannot be serious. But that was one of the proposals. It should be vetted by the Electoral Commission. The very same Electoral Commission, quite frankly, who has done precious little to clean the voters list, to ensure the integrity in elections. And his proposal makes absolutely no mention to access to private media, as is the law in Antigua. Now, how far is Antigua from Dominica, Sean? I can't remember. It's right there. You mean to say Sir Byron did not know the legislation in Antigua and the gold standard with respect to participation in election? Open, unrestricted, unmitigated access? Mais parfait. The provision for a national ID card rather than a voter ID card. I've heard Mr. Linton very eloquently talk about Sir Byron's surprising retreat from suggesting a voter ID card. Why so? Why did he change his mind at the 11th hour? Whose interests is he serving through that change? What about the other area of concern I raised? No specific indication of the biometric information that the ID cards should contain. Now we know, based on what we've been told, that the government was not pleased or thrilled by inclusion of the fingerprint information on these cards. But why? If your interest is to authenticate and to legitimize and preserve the integrity of the voting process, why would you be opposed to such a basic requirement? The answer is clear. Because you want to remove certain important and significant ways of authenticating the identity of each voter. And what legitimate reason could you have for doing so? Ask the person in the mirror, Sean, the person you see in the mirror, that question. The next area of concern. allowing Dominicans residing abroad to vote in Dominica if they visited the island for 90 days over a 5-year period. Gasson, look, we all went to school. You know that visiting a place is different from residing in a place. We don't need Sir Byron to obfuscate the definition, but yet that's exactly what he is doing, to come up with a definition that accords and is in sync and lines up with the interpretation of the incumbent government over the last 3 election cycles. As long as you visit Dominica, Gasson, you should be able to vote. And I've raised the question and I'll raise it again. Where in the Eastern Caribbean do you have such a bogus interpretation of the residency requirements of the legislation as a precondition to vote? Nowhere. You will search and you will search and you will not find, if I'm to quote Short Shirt. But that is what is being inflicted or imposed on Dominica. And Sir Byron knows, because he's from St. Kitts, and he knows what happens in St. Kitts, what happened in St. Kitts a few years ago, when the members of or certain sections of the St. Kitts, the Kittitian population, took matters in their own land, when they heard that a plane load of voters residing abroad were coming to vote in local elections. He knows. But yet he wants to inflict this punishment on Dominicans. What about the last area of concern I raised? Placing faith in the Chief Electoral Officer and Chairman of the Commission to ensure the financial independence of the Commission or compliance with the proposed reforms. Can you really believe this? Can you believe this? Some of your provisions are contingent on the Chief Electoral Officer and the Chairman of the Commission to ensure that some of the changes you propose come into effect. I mean, what is happening? Has there been a religious conversion of some of these officials? Have they been saved on the road to Damascus? Have they undergone a Damascene conversion? Did some pastor sprinkled or blow a goat's horn into their ears and make them transform themselves so that they will act in a legal and legitimate fashion? We know the answer to that one. The answer is no. So when you look at this constellation of concerns, you will realize that the furthest thing from the mind of Sir Byron when he came up with this final report was adherence to the rule of law, adherence to the principles of free and fair elections. And it's a crying shame. You know, in terms of third world and first world, you know that there's been a phenomenon for decades that Sean Douglas, many old ships which have exhausted their lives are taken to so-called third world countries like the Philippines, probably South Asia, where they are stranded on the beach and where the impoverished people frenziedly chop them up to pieces and expose themselves to all types of chemical contaminants. This is analogous to that phenomenon. What is being proposed or dumped or foisted on Dominica are things or reforms which would never see the light of day in other countries, Western democracies, not even the light of day in our Caribbean neighbors. And that, in my view, is a crying shame. Because once again, it shows that there are persons out there, our Caribbean brothers, who still think that there is a hierarchy in the islands and Dominica occupies the bottom rung of that ladder. That is what hurts so bad.
Yes, you tuned to Talk on the Block. I hope you've not missed any of this for the last nearly an hour now. You've really, if you've missed it, you've missed a lot. I'm sure that you will probably try to get a recording later on, but it's really been an interesting program. Before we go on, Dr. Andre, to the substance of your recommendations and your proposals, are these proposals? Is it? Would you call it a paper on electoral reform, a blueprint, a vision? What would you call it?
Sorry, are you talking about my proposals?
Yes. What would you call it?
Right. First of all, what I try to do in these proposals is to identify what I perceive to be the most important aspects of true electoral reform that can give Dominicans the assurance that the system of choosing a government is free and fair. That was the overriding concern. I don't profess that the reforms I recommended constitute the be-all and end-all, the ultimate book of laws that require no adjustment, no review, no comment on. No. What it seeks to do is to address those fundamental areas that unfortunately have transformed Dominican elections in the past as no more than a rubber stamp. As no more than a rubber stamp. And that is basically what I have sought to do. I've been guided. As I said, I've had occasion to review previous drafts of Sir Byron's report. I've commented on them, I've written about them, and therefore to produce this slate of suggested reforms was not difficult. I've also been assisted by persons, the owner of the radio station, Mr. G, and others, by listening to some of the commentary on radio. And it seems to me that basically what has been indicated just vindicated my position, that these are the most important areas that we should seek to transform or to reform. And I think if collectively that we address each of those areas, I think we would make a drastic, a fundamental step towards preserving the integrity of the elections in a fashion that quite frankly is transformative, in a fashion that hopefully would turn its back on the last 20 years of elections, and in a fashion that would give hope to Dominicans on the ground that they have the right to make the appropriate choice in terms of selecting a government, and that their vote is not diluted by shadowy figures from abroad who are paid to come and subvert elections in Dominica.
So, Dr. Andre, let us now look in some detail at some of your actual proposals. I think is it 18 or 20 of them? How many?
Yeah, I think, as I said, it's a work in progress. I actually revised some and I added a couple.
Okay, so let's go starting with fixed dates for general elections enshrined in the Constitution. And before you come in, I don't believe that was part of the remit of Sir Dennis Byron, but I think it's a very welcome proposal, having fixed dates for elections. So let's hear from you in terms of on these proposals.
And the reason for that is just basic fairness. Again, recall what happened in November or after November 6, 2022, after the declaration of that quote unquote election. As if from nowhere, we were besieged with banners, bans, so on, suggesting that a significant degree of spending had taken place. So you can see that if the opposition had participated, they would have been at a significant disadvantage.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and if the purpose of true election reform is to preserve the integrity of the system, then clearly you have to address every single component of the system that has a disadvantage to the other side. How can you allow in secret one side to be spending all this money? We don't know the source of this money. It's not our damn business. While the opposition, quite frankly, has no indication as to when this is going to be called. And the last one is most egregious. Why? Because it was called almost 3 years before these elections were constitutionally due. Now, I heard some commentary that perhaps that having fixed dates does not square, for example, with a declaration of no independence, no confidence if it is successful in the parliament. That is not an issue at all, because all these provisos could be made subject or except for certain circumstances. The fixed elections are as indicated on a certain date. So there's nothing contrary about such a provision if in fact a vote of no confidence is successful in the parliament. But it preserves the basic tenet of elections, basic fairness, because that is what we're looking for, basic fairness.
We have about 15 minutes to look at all the recommendations. Yes, I want to start taking calls by 2:10. So try to be brief on each one.
Okay, you want me to comment? Okay, the other one is a new re-registration of voters. That is common sense. Or you can have 78,000 voters on your list on an island where the number of eligible voters doesn't exceed 40,000. Basic common sense and decency and fairness. Now, subject to paragraph 6, only persons who are ordinarily resident in Dominica for a fixed period before an election should be eligible to vote in elections in Dominica. That speaks for itself. And it prevents this unholy practice of parachuting people into Dominica to vote and having them go the next day or two after buying a barbecue chicken at some facility in Dominica. Now,
you've spoken about, I'm not sure you're going to touch it, about what they call virtual constituencies. You want to explain that?
Exactly. Now, that, quite frankly, is consistent with something your uncle proposed years ago. That is to say, and Rosie Douglas was very astute. Rosie Douglas understood that you cannot allow persons living in diaspora to vote in all constituencies in Dominica, because it would dilute the local vote. So what he proposed is to have persons, eligible persons who can vote, and obviously the criteria would have to be laid out and accepted, into what I describe as virtual constituencies. So whereas their representatives would have a say in parliament in some fashion, obviously there would have to be a revision of some of the laws regarding attendance, physical attendance in parliament. But that would give Dominicans in the diaspora a say in parliament without, as I said, significantly diminishing the significance of the vote of the Dominicans on the ground, who, after all, are the ones who have to deal with the realities on the ground, not persons in the diaspora. So that is the justification for that reference to virtual constituencies. In other words, to draw a happy medium between persons out there who want to participate and Dominicans on the ground who have to deal with the hardships occasioned following an election. I talked about national voter ID card as opposed to a national ID card with biometric data, including fingerprinting. The justification for that is obvious: to ensure the authenticity of the vote. And let me just quickly say something. Somebody told me that there's an odious electoral practice now. When you go to vote, an electoral officer tells you, "Well, give me your vote. I want to see something." That's wrong. Once a vote is cast, the vote should be folded by the voter and placed into the box. That's how it should be. But why should someone who is supervising the elections want to see the person's ballot, presumably to see who they vote for? Absolutely wrong. And I talked about a fixed timetable for cleaning the voters list. The reasons for that is obvious. All parties should have equal access to both state and private media. Fixed limits on campaign finance expenditure both before and during any reporting period stipulated in the applicable legislation. That speaks for itself. There has to be fixed limits, especially where we don't know where the funds are coming from one particular political entity. Foreign companies and persons should not participate, should not be making contributions towards any candidate or party during an election. The reasons for that is obvious. Reasonable fixed limits on the amount of money that a local Dominican or local company can contribute to the election of any candidate or political party. The reason for that is obvious. We don't want any entity buying the elections. And bear in mind one thing, one additional caution I'm going to add. An offshore company based in Dominica is not considered a local company. The reasons for that is obvious. The definition of bribery I've already commented on. It should be stated expressly in our local, irrespective of what Subaru is saying. It should be stated expressly in our legislation. A special prosecutor to prosecute election crimes. The reason is obvious. Look at what happened after the CCJ rendered its decision in July of 2022. You had the unsavory development of a senior counsel and a lawyer for the Prime Minister writing to the DPP asking them to nullify the case. And guess what happened, Sean Douglas? C'est ça y fait. That's what she did. So how can you have any confidence in the integrity of the system where the DPP is prepared to act at the behest of the Prime Minister's counsel or his special legal advisor? So do away with the discretion of the DPP in prosecuting of these cases. Appoint a special prosecutor. Now you may ask, well, who's going to do that appointing? That can be worked out. In many jurisdictions, you have special prosecutors playing roles in the administration of justice. And remove, in terms of election petitions, the discretion of the DPP to nullify or withdraw the charge or charges. Because we know on the last occasion I just referred to, that was done purely for political purposes. What about a breach of the electoral laws? It should not just be punishable by a fine or imprisonment, but also by disqualification. It speaks for itself, the significance of that. Now, what about the financing of the Electoral Commission? Bear in mind, earlier I referred to the fact that the political directorate refused to fund the voters' ID cards. You take that discretion away and you establish an independent body which would have a constitutional mandate to provide funding to the Electoral Commission for its legitimate duties. You remove any political interference from that process. Again, the justification is clear. What about persons in a conflict of interest being on the Electoral Commission? How can you have people who are selling passports involved in preserving the integrity of our elections? You tell me, Sean, you're a man of great wisdom. How can you seriously have that? So that should just not be the case. That should be an automatic disqualification because they have an interest in the outcome of the proceedings. They have an interest in perpetuating unfree and unfair elections in Dominica. What about expanding the Electoral Commission? Because now we have 5, and we know the 3 officers who control the show. Bringing people from civic societies, member of the religious groups, the business, the legal profession, and others. Let them among themselves nominate someone with the understanding that the president does not have the discretion to reject any of these persons recommended.
So would you have to amend the constitution?
Oh, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong. And again, bear in mind, as I said, I understand the hurdles in terms of amending the constitution. But it has to be done at some point when it can be done. And that's why the people have to voice their desires insofar as free and independent elections. And the leaders of the political parties I've added should be mandated to participate in debates, because that will inure to the benefit of the electorate. They will have an opportunity to hear and see for themselves. In the 60s, the Labour Party stalwarts would say, "You lie, you lie, you lie, you can't koyo." In 2023, voters should have that right putan koyo. And that is why it's imperative Now, someone I heard in a comment said, if all these measures are enacted, what effect would they have? Well, I know the effect they will not have. I know what will happen if nothing is done to change the bad movie that takes place every electoral cycle. There has to be a body of laws which empower persons, the correct or appropriate authorities to take action where those laws are violated. And we still have a court system. We have seen that the CCJ, quite frankly, has made decisions based on the rule of law, as opposed to based on incumbency. So there is remedy. There is a recourse to justice in case of the violation of any of these changes. But it is imperative to have them. And that is why we should consider them very significantly in a very fundamental fashion. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, Irvin, I just want to just briefly, before we move on, a prime minister should serve only 2 consecutive terms of office. I've heard people say that, what if somebody likes, they want to continue, the prime minister is happy with what he's doing or what she's doing? Why should there be a limit? Let the people decide how long the prime minister stays in office.
If the people were exercising their own free will, independent of manipulation, then you would have confidence in those views. Bear in mind one thing, Edward Leblanc said that they should serve 2 consecutive, but he went on to say that there should be a cooling off period. And if the people are desirous of his or her return, whoever that person is, the people should have the ability to reinstate them, quite frankly. But bear in mind the perpetuation of dictatorship, remaining in power for an indefinite period. That is what it's all about. Because there's inherent problems with someone being in power indefinitely. And we Dominicans, we need no education from anyone with respect to those problems. You don't need any education or elucidation of those problems. I mean, you have persons, supporters being given brown paper bags in the middle of the night, while persons who are known to be non-supporters get nothing. Items being delivered at Christmas. You have little cronies going from house to house, and when they arrive at a certain house, which is known to be the house of a non-supporter, they pass by as if they never saw that place. Sean, is that what you want to be perpetuated in Dominica? That blatant bias, partisanship, that is eating at the very core of Dominica, we know. Setting friend against friend, relative against relative. Is that what you want? I'm not saying you in person, but but that is the logical development of having this kind of look at it from a historical perspective. Think of Papa Doc. Think of Fulgencio Batista.
Cuba.
Think of Somoza. And I'm not talking about the samosas that you love so well, Sean. Think of those little tin pot dictators in the West Indies and in Latin America in the early decades of the 20th century. Think of the harm they caused. Think of the number of disappearances. Think of leaders who talk about throwing hot water on the opposition. Think of leaders who proclaim piously that Dominica doesn't need an opposition. Huh? Think of those things. Think of persons are demonized simply because they have the audacity to support the opposition. That is the prelude to a swelling act. And that swelling act means the destruction of people's rights. That's what we have to be afraid of, Sean.
Just this sort of, my next question really is not really directly connected to what we've been discussing. But as you know, the second term of Mr. Savary ends from October 1, you'll have a new president. What if that new president turns out to be Roosevelt Skerrit?
Well, I think growing up, there's a very dear lady in my life. When you do bad, she would say something, it's your funeral. That's all I will say. It's Dominican's funeral.
Numbers to call. I'll open the lines in a moment. Just want to go back to take some ads, and then we'll come back to take your calls with Dr. Irvin Andre for the next 48 or 49 minutes.
Auto Trade introduces Thrifty Thursdays. On the last Thursday of every month, get up to 20% discount of various items in the store between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. But wait, there's more. Also, look out for what Deal of the Day offer for an even bigger discount. You can't miss out on this real deal savings. So come to Auto Trade on Thrifty Thursday. At Auto Trade, it's more than a vehicle, it's a relationship. Terms and conditions apply.
Person passager pour dire nous. But if they could, they would say something like this. I like Linus Vepladu. They wanted to tell my family brought me to Linus after I died. And the way Linus took care of my body with respect and dignity, my jamais tapé West spécial à l'émotif vivant. Linus Funeral Home, 30 years of experience, professional, reliable and compassionate service. We've had 24-hour emergency service. So là, mon numéro, pas quitter rien bas ou dire. PA 449-1800, 275-7564, 449-2100, or the emergency number 277-1800. If you tout busy in Linus, that time is for you to breathe and grieve. Linus is not willing that any should die, but Zandra, you must go. So when you go with the best chaperone, Linus Funeral Home. Mama tout family, si c'est pas Linus, il a venu aller pied.
Our numbers are 449-1800, 449-2100, 275-7564, and 276-0400. Call Lyndhurst Funeral Home today.
If you know your favorite store, dial it now. 612-1253. That's Mega Deals. You can rely on Mega for some real deals on name brand clothing and electronics. High quality, low price. We are a wholesale and retail store located in Calabishi, right on the main road. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as Mega Deals Dominica. Like our page. Check out our stuff. Call us. Visit us. Would appreciate that. Come try it on. Love it. Buy it at Mega Deals. Your one and only online and brick and mortar store. Mega Deals is also on wheels. We make it convenient for your shopping. We deliver straight to your door. Email us at info@megadealsda.com. Rely on Mega Deals for some real deals.
Come visit Central Cooperative Credit Union. Your market solution. Your market solution. Come visit us at Central Cooperative Credit Union. Your market solution. Come get your mortgage. You can switch your mortgage. Get a new mortgage. Refinance your mortgage. We are your market solution. Lock in your interest rate as low as 4.75%. We are your market solution. Up to $100,000 loan protection. It's an easy process and quick application. Central Cooperative Credit Union, your mortgage solution. Come get your mortgage. Visit us today at 4244 Federation Drive in Goodwill or Bay Street in Portsmouth. Central Cooperative Credit Union, your mortgage solution. Terms and conditions apply.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I'm live on air, so no calls. No, I'm live on air. Yes, welcome back to Talk on the Block. We're now ready to open the telephone lines to take your calls. It's now 2. Let's put my phone on silent here. Yes, it's 2:15. We have Dr. Irvin Andre with us this afternoon for the next. We have about 45 minutes left. Please keep your contributions as brief as possible. Sorry about that. Yes. Okay. All right. Yes. So Dr. Andre, we'll take our first call. Let's see who we have on the line here this afternoon. Keep your comments as brief as possible so we can take as many calls as possible. Good afternoon, caller. You're live. You're through to Dr. Irvin Andre.
Yes, good afternoon. Dr. Andre referred to 2 points that I have made before, so I want to clarify.
Right.
One regarding the vote of no confidence.
Yes.
The vote of no confidence always resides in the electorate. At every election, they can express their vote of no confidence in the government. Under the Westminster system, it is shared with Parliament, and Parliament can exercise it. My point is simple, that if we institute a fixed term, which I quite agree with, we have to understand, and people must understand, that the vote of no confidence is therefore, by that act, returned totally and completely to the electorate, so that only the electorate can enact a vote of no confidence on the fixed term. So that's number one. The second one I really want to deal with, because I think you mischaracterized what I said, what I asked. My question is, if all the proposals that you have made are accepted, how does the electorate guarantee that the government in power will follow them? Not what will happen if they are adopted or what will happen if they're rejected. What I'm saying, if they are the law in the country, how does the electorate guarantee that the government in power follows them? That's the question.
Thank you, Kola.
Well, it's a good question, to be quite frank with you. But that is why we have to be ever vigilant. And that is why we have an obligation to educate our people about their responsibility in terms of choosing persons who would adhere and who would obey the Constitution. The caller is absolutely correct. I think Shakespeare puts it best when he says, there's no art to find a man's construction in the face. You cannot just look at the person's face and say, that person will abide by the rules. But through education increases the chance that they will get it right. So your caller is absolutely correct. There's no guarantee. There's no guarantees that they will get it right. But if they are given information, if they're educated about their rights and their powers in a democratic state, and if, for example, you have things like debates, they can understand better whether that person would adhere to the Constitution. So I agree with your caller that we cannot absolutely guarantee, but we can certainly take some measures that would increase the chances that the electorate would get it right. So that's my response to the caller. And I don't necessarily disagree with him, but that is just my rejoinder.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back to the telephone lines. Let's see who we have here. Good afternoon, caller. You're live. Q95, talk on the block. Caller, are you paying attention? You're going to lose a great opportunity. I think you will have lost it. Okay. Hello, good afternoon, caller. You're live. Okay, that person wasn't paying attention. Good afternoon, caller. You're live on Talk on the Block. We have Dr. Irvin Andre with us this afternoon.
Yes, Sean. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Sean.
Yes, good afternoon, caller. Thank you for calling.
And good afternoon, Mr. Dr. Andre.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Sean, the card has been proposed. The ID card has been proposed for voting. Is it going to be a general or purpose card, or is it going to be solely for voting?
That's it? That's it, caller? That's it, caller?
Yes.
No. I'm asking that question because I have something else I want to follow up with.
Well, I can tell the caller that what Sue Barron is proposing is a national ID card, multi-purpose card. So that, in short, that is what is being proposed.
Okay, no. If that is so, everybody that is of age living in Dominica, it should be mandatory that you have an ID card so that you could be identified. Am I right or wrong?
Well, I assume that's the reason for the proposal that you should have a national ID card as opposed to a voter card. That's what I'm assuming.
Okay. Now, are they going to put some distinguished mark on there that's going to determine whether that person with that ID card, that all-purpose ID card, is eligible to vote, or once you have a card, you could go vote?
That is a fundamentally important question, caller. That is exactly part of the reasons why persons who are concerned about the integrity of the elections are proposing a voter ID card as opposed to a national ID card. You are absolutely correct. That is one of the concerns.
Yes, because another thing, Sean, that we have to understand, and there's nothing in my heart that's telling me that Mr. Barron or Dr. Barron, or whatever they want to call him, had no idea that an election was going to be called in 2022. Because the Prime Minister would not just call an election if he didn't have everything in place to satisfy his election calling. And I think that guy was conspired with the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister had everything, he allowed him to give everything in place, and then come out with a thing. So okay, I'm gonna give you my first report. And as soon as he did that, bam, the next day the Prime Minister called election.
Caller, you have to say, Caller, sorry to stop your flow. You have to say alleged there, because you said that in effect there was a conspiracy, but you have to say alleged, because we don't know for sure.
Okay,
although we have our suspicions, of course. Go ahead, Caller. Continue.
All right. Okay. Yes. Okay. It's alleged then. Okay. Because I think there's no way that's gonna happen. And as we all see, that as soon as the man called his election, he had his candidates, everything in place, and everything was there for him, you know. And I think Dominica have become a dumping ground for shit. Excuse my language. And it's time that that last piece of shit that was presented to Dominica has to throw it right back in Barron's face and tell him, we don't want that.
Thank you, Caller. Numbers to call: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. The overseas line 305-432-9624. We want as many calls as possible. We have Dr. Andre here this afternoon. It's not often we have Dr. Andre. Certainly, I have not had him for a while. Well, I had him once, I think, last week, but before that, I hadn't had him in a while. So we want to seize that opportunity. So let's see now, line 3 here. Okay, we've lost that call. Let's see who we have on the other line. Good afternoon, caller. You're live. You're through to Dr. Irvin Andre.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sean.
Hello.
Sean, good afternoon, Dr. Andre.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, sir, Mr. Dr. Andre, this is a question for you, sir. I would like your honest opinion, Mr. Andre, your honest opinion about
Sorry, about what?
Hello, caller. Are you still there? Yeah, something
went wrong.
Hello, continue. Okay.
Yes, I was saying I'd like your honest opinion.
Yes.
On what?
Your honest opinion based on these guys that are ruling Dominica. How would you call them? Are they government personalities or are they a bunch of gangsters? How would you call them?
Well, I will say that they are men intent on feathering their own nests. I mean, if you can tell me that you live in a rental accommodation for $64,000 at a time when Dominicans are crying about the cost of food, the cost of building materials, Dominicans can't renovate their homes. There is hardly basic things in the hospital, such as a tetanus shot, such as paracetamol, toilet paper, are conspicuous by their absence. Then, quite frankly, the evidence is clear and beyond dispute. That's how I see it.
Yes, let's go back to the telephone lines. Let's see who we have on the overseas line. Good afternoon, caller. You're live on Talk on the Block.
Good afternoon, Sean.
Good afternoon, caller. Go right ahead.
And good afternoon to Dr. Andre.
Good afternoon, Bob Marley.
Yes, sir. But Dr. Andre, I don't see the problem where even if we have a limited term, 2 terms, that will stop Parliament from tabling a motion of no confidence. You could still have a motion of no confidence before your 2 term up.
Yep, that's my view.
Laws, or you are caught in some kind of form of corruption. The people still have a right to table a vote of no confidence.
In the Parliament, yes, I agree.
Yeah, but the question I have for you is that whether it is illegal or it's legal, or whether the Electoral Commission has the power or the authority to distribute or provide national ID card. That's why I have the problem, because I know the Electoral Commission, all the business is to do with election. Now a national ID card has nothing to do with election. So I just I want you to clarify it for me, big brother.
Well, there's nothing. There's nothing need clarifying. I agree with you totally. The mandate of the Electoral Commission is to govern in elections in Dominica to ensure it's free and fair. Their mandate should be ensuring that every prospective or eligible voter has a voter ID card. That's my position.
Yes, sir. That is why I would never tolerate none of Byron report, because there's a lot of stuff in it, Dr. Andre, where it goes against our constitution. He's like, and he's in a perfect situation. He's learned, he's a luminary, and he got a lot of big degrees, and he cannot clarify those simple problem we have in terms of residency versus absentee. I just find Byron is a hitman. That's how I call him. He's a hitman. He just hire him to do a hit job. Thank you. I'm listening.
Thank you.
Well, he's certainly hitting Dominicans hard with these reports.
Yeah, well, as we've said, as Alvin said yesterday on this program, and you're saying today that yes, Byron is a legal luminary, but he's not an expert on electoral legislation, electoral laws. The persons we've had from the OAS and other places have far more experience than Sir Byron. Many countries, people who've been part of the OAS missions have had far more experience. Let's go back to telephone lines here this afternoon. Let's see the lines. Good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Yeah, hello. Hello.
You're live, caller. Good afternoon, caller. You're live. You're through Dr. Andre.
Sean and Mr. Andre. Just a quick question. I know we are pressed for time. I would like to know what is or was the flaws or how do you call it, the loopholes in the present forward class past electoral laws of the country. Hence the reason that we prompted, so to speak, for electoral reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can answer. There were no real loopholes, really. A number of cases has defined what it means for someone to be a resident in a particular island or country. There should not be any loophole with respect to that. Years ago, the senior counsel made some representation that the chief electoral officer does not have a discretion to clean a voters list. How nonsensical can you be? And guess what? The chief electoral officer accepted that statement as if it was delivered on tablets of stone. This is what we have to deal with. Can you go to Jamaica and tell them, guys, so you cannot clean your voters list? You can't give the dead a decent burial by removing them from the list? Can you imagine what they would say to you if you profess to be some legal expert or luminary? This is one of the reasons why historically the Jamaicans have been distrustful of regional institutions interfering with their governance, you see. It makes no sense. There should not have been any ambiguity with respect to the interpretation of the legislation. But these ambiguities were fabricated and they were manufactured to serve one interest. And that is why we are where we are today.
Yes, let's go back to the telephone lines this afternoon here on Talk on the Block. Good afternoon, caller. You're live. Hello, caller. Good afternoon. You're live. You're through to Dr. Andre. Okay, the person is not paying attention, so we'll go straight to the other. Yes. Good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Good afternoon, Sean. Good afternoon, Dr. Andre.
Good afternoon, sir.
Gentlemen, we've seen the profile of Roosevelt Skerrit, and I love to compare him to the Donald Trump. Some of these people, they just can't be equal. That word equal is not in the dictionary. It's always some underhanded deal to try and get on top. Roosevelt Skerrit should have no part with electoral reform in a democratic system. It's just not in his psyche. He has to stay away from it, especially the fact that he is the incumbent prime minister, especially, not just because of something that I may believe is psychological in his brain, but he is the prime minister. He should stay away from it. Now, when you have the Electoral Commission with salesmen of passports, They don't like to hear that, but that's what the crux of the matter. You can't have them in and out of that electoral commission. How does Roosevelt Skerrit expect to appoint these people and expect there to be fairness? We're looking for fairness. You see that word? Eh? Yeah. Elections were free, but they were not fair.
They were not necessarily
And that is
fair.
why we want, That is why we want this anyway, enough said. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. You want to come in briefly, Dr. Andre?
Yeah, well, again, there's nothing difficult to understand about what we're seeking, what in my view, right-thinking patriots should be seeking. This is not some type of legal exercise. This is not something within the knowledge of a select group of legal persons and so on. It's common sense and experience. Every day in the Western world, jurors are being told, rely on your common sense and experience. That's what you need to understand what's happening. Nothing more, nothing less. There's nothing, the parameters of being fair, treating each other fairly. There's a biblical justification for that. You're your brother's keeper, and we may be blessed with certain different talents and so on, but we are still equal in the eyes of whoever's looking down on us, to be quite frank with you. Fairness. That's all that we are looking for, and that's all we should expect, and that's what we deserve. Fairness in the process.
Yes, we're getting messages here. In my opinion, the Byron report should be symbolically burnt in public and get us to move on with ridding ourselves of this tyrannical regime. That's a message that came in a while ago. Another critical one. Let me see if I have any more messages to read this afternoon. I'm old enough to remember as a child when you heard people screaming, "Defy!" You ran out from where you were and see where you could help or save that you could. This is where we are now. Everyone needs to come out or we'll lose all we have. Defy, let's save Dominica. And the last message I'll read this afternoon. Sean, why is everyone befuddled and dismayed by this final report? From the inception, it was apparent that the idea of providing a legal framework, maintaining a level electoral playing field was not going to be part of the final report. So another message coming in here on my phone. Let's take another call here. Let's see who's on the line. Let's see. Good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Yes, pleasant good afternoon to you, Dr. Andre and Senator Sean Douglas.
Hello.
I have two questions, one for Dr. Andre and one for Senator Douglas. The question for Senator Douglas is on electoral reform. A person who did not participate in the electoral process by voting and being a senator in parliament, is that fair? Now let me ask Dr. Andre's question one time for the sake of time. Dr. Andre now, as a person who lives outside of Dominica and works outside of Dominica, how do you see it being fair for you to be staying outside and trying to influence the electoral process in Dominica, especially when you do not want foreigners, Dominicans living abroad, to be able to cast their vote? Thank you very much for taking my call. I'll sit back and listen.
I am prepared to answer, quite frankly, Sean. How can it not be fair that because I live outside, I cannot voice an opinion as to what is right and what is wrong in the state of Dominica, not Denmark? You, to the extent, because I don't know you, I don't know what you profess, I don't know what you adhere to the extent, and I'm not saying that you do, if you support Dominicans coming to vote who live abroad, how can you with a straight face be opposed to I expressing an opinion as to what is right and wrong in Dominica? You tell me that. You answer me. How can you with a straight face have a problem with I expressing my views? Do you have a problem with me sending help to Dominica? Do you have a problem with me giving scholarships or bursaries to Dominican students? Do you have a problem with me sending barrels not only to my family, but to other persons? Do you have a problem with me hiring Dominica post Maria? Gasho,
Yes, well, caller, from what well, of course, as you know, or you may not know, I am registered in Trafalgar, and as far as I'm aware, there wasn't a contest in Trafalgar, a number of seats, as you know, because the main opposition boycotted. There wasn't, I believe, an election in Trafalgar. So I think Irvin may have got through unopposed. In terms of my selection as a senator, clearly I opposed the election. I feel the election was a sham. But elections having taken place, then it was a decision I had to make, having been invited to become a senator, whether I should become a senator or I should stand on the sidelines. I decided, well, I will become a senator and be a force in the opposition, because clearly, if we had not agreed to participate, certainly what would have in the parliament today would be, we have a one-party state, but it would be a one-party state, total a one-party state. At least now it's a partial one-party state. So that's, I hope, caller, answers your question. Numbers to call: 449-3095, 449-3096, 616-4257, overseas line 305-432-9624. But I really would like people to call in to let us address the substance of the proposals of Dr. Andre. That's really the whole point of today's discussion. We want to move forward and not move backwards. Good afternoon, caller. You're live on Talk on the Block.
Good afternoon to you, Sean.
Good afternoon, caller.
And good afternoon to you, Dr. Andre. Dr. Andre, I just call you a major. But let me make my point. You know, we are in a serious legal problem in Dominica, because I'm going to give you a quick example, Sean. Sean, some time ago, the final appellate court was the Privy Council. Dominica, in recent time, has pulled out from the Privy Council and now has the CCJ as its final appellate court. Good. Having done so, I would assume that the government would have respected the principles and values of the CCJ and want to uphold at all points, uphold the rule of law. Now, with the same CCJ, that when that treating matter was thrown out, or when that treating matter went to them, they said that has to go be reverted to the courts. The government ordered the DPP now to nullify the matter. So who's the boss here? The CCJ or the government? Another example. We talk about the CCJ again when that matter, the petition went in, right? There was that matter that we say that straight off the point. The CCJ said, again, Dominica, the Commonwealth of Dominica should not enter into any elections with all these stains, right? With all these stains. The government now refused. They did not even take that on. They just put the CCJ apart. And now it's adopting a Byron's report. Who is now the true appellate court, final appellate court now? Is the government of Dominica now the final appellate court for Dominica? Sean, we are in a serious problem. And if you see Dominicans do not take that thing seriously about electoral reform, we are doomed to failure. Because you cannot tell me the final court that represents our interest give ideas as to how we should proceed legally. Mm-hmm. And you as a sitting government disrespecting the rules of that final court and getting your way. Have a good afternoon.
Great point, caller. Dr. Andre, you want to respond?
The caller is absolutely correct. And that is part of the problem. Adherence to rule of law. Somewhere I read, to borrow a phrase from Martin Luther King, a leader once said, and I don't know his name, my memory doesn't go that far, no law, no constitution will stop me from doing A, B, or C. What does that tell you, Sean Douglas? You're a man of great wisdom. I know you've benefited from the collective support of your family. What does that tell you?
Have I? Yes, I want to read just a couple of messages here on my phone. national ID cards presumably will allow for all card holders, nationals, whether by birth or otherwise, wherever they may live around the world, to vote. Why should CBI citizens be given such privilege when they get our citizenship simply because they have paid for it, but are never ever required to set foot on the island? Ridiculous. That's a message coming in here from England. Dominica in England. Another one, choose your leaders. They're quoting from Octavia Butler, Parable of the Talents. Choose your leaders with wisdom and forethought. To be led by a coward is to be controlled by all that the coward fears. To be led by a fool is to be led by the opportunists who control the fool. To be led by a thief is to offer up your most precious treasures to be stolen. To be led by a liar is to ask to be told lies. To be led by a tyrant is to sell yourself and those you love into slavery. So the message is coming through here. Okay, let's go back to the telephone lines. We have got about 15 or so more minutes. So let's keep our calls as brief as possible. Good afternoon, caller. You're live on Talk on the Block.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Sean.
Yes, good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Yeah, Dr. Andres, good afternoon. Dr. Andres, I want to make a contribution, right? But before you leave, even if for one time, I want to hear you say, Dominican pass up garçon. Mr. Douglas, from the inception of Mr. Byron, I told the entire world and Dominicans like me that I am a mason by profession. And if you pay me to build a wall for you, however you want the world, that's how I'm going to build the wall, because you're paying me. You know, and from that time I begin to oppose, and even people who are lawyers, I hear them say, well, listen, let him work, and say, if these guys are professionals and they're saying that, well, let him do his work. You know, I agree with that. But now we can see for sure that he just threw a hit on us. But I want to say this in conclusion briefly, Mr. Sean. When people are criticizing Mr. Lennox Linton, I want to say again on the record, this is the most brilliant one we have seen in Dominica, because the Prime Minister was trying to fool him, telling him, well, let's come to an agreement, let's send something, because he knew what was going to happen, and he's trying to fool Mr. Linton, tell him, let's send something. Mr. Linton gave him the answer, and what the answer Mr. Linton gave to him, this is what we are seeing today. So I call on all Dominicans to stand strong and throw that report back to Mr. Whatever his name. What is his name again?
So then it's Byron.
Mr. Byron. Send it back to him in some kind of old dirty envelope and say we don't want that. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Cole. Let's go back to the telephone lines this afternoon. We want to take as many calls as we can. Let's see. Okay. Good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Yes, I had to call back because I think some education is necessary as Justice
Andre?
To go up. I called to, anyhow, people need to understand the difference between a vote of no confidence and expulsion for cause. The Constitution says now that if there's a vote of no confidence in the government, the Prime Minister can dissolve Parliament, and that will have to change.
Okay, that's a vote, yeah, a vote of no confidence of in Parliament.
In Parliament.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to telephone.
No, I agree. That's what I was referring to.
Yes,
in Parliament.
Once you have vote of no confidence, it's Parliament. It's not on the streets. Okay, let's go back to telephone lines. Good afternoon, caller. You're live on Talk on the Block.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I want to be the devil advocate this afternoon, and I want to 30 seconds. Like I mentioned today, I am the devil's advocate today. Now, listening to all of that electoral reform, this and that, we're just talking, and nothing happening. Yes, I accept the fact you have good guests in studio. They give in vital information. But although I respect all of that crucial information, it doesn't make no sense at the end of the journey, because we say the same thing. We say we're not voting, we're not accepting the government, and you as the host that said that, you are a senator in the house today. Everything doesn't make sense in Dominica, so best we just shut the fuck up. Sorry about my language, but good afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you, caller. Yes, we need to be, yes, whatever. I mean, I'm sure that, it's a very emotional subject and all that, but please try to keep a sense of decorum when you speak. Okay, let's go back to the telephone lines now. Let's see. Good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Good afternoon, man. And how are you guys doing today?
Good.
Good afternoon. Good.
Okay. So I have a quick comment. To the man who called and who was trying to question Dr. Andre as to what he should be doing and what he shouldn't be doing. My question to Dr. Andre, are you a Dominican born?
No, I am actually, my parents are Dominican born, but I grew up in Dominica, and under the laws of Dominica, I'm a Dominican citizen. So I'm not allowing any political hack to try to diminish my Dominican citizenship. I'll tell you that much right now.
Okay. So you
Such
are
as the caller.
a citizen, right? You care about Dominica and what is happening in our country. My question to that person is, when Prime Minister Skerrit hired whatever, the sir, and I do put it in quotes, the big sir, Dennis Byron, to do what a Dominican can do, did he question that? Another question, when foreigners are getting all the jobs, when they are building all the significant buildings that can help Dominicans propel to the next level, does he comment about that? Does he have a problem with that? So my comment to this man is, go sit yourself somewhere. Go and trouble those who needs to be troubled. Go and talk to your prime minister about all what he's doing that he's not supposed to be doing, and leave people who want to really take Dominica somewhere. Leave them alone. Let them say what they have to say so that we can learn. Because left to Skerrit, we will learn nothing. Left to Skerrit, we will have nothing. Left to Skerrit, we will be nothing. Only he and the people that, support him, they are the ones who will have something. Well, they will have the little pittance he will give them. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and good afternoon.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you, caller. Very well said.
Auto Trade introduces Thrifty Thursdays. On the last Thursday of every month, get up to 20% discount of various items in the store between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. But wait, there's more. Also, look out for what Deal of the Day offer for an even bigger discount. You can't miss out on this real deal savings. So come to Auto Trade on Thrifty Thursday. At Auto Trade, it's more than a vehicle, it's a relationship. Terms and conditions apply.
Personne pas arrivé pour dire nous. But if they could, they would say something like this. I like Linus Vepladu. They wanted to tell my family brought me to Linus after I die. And the way Linus took care of my body with respect and dignity, ma jamais tapé quartier ouest spécial à la moitié vivant. Linus Funeral Home, 30 years of experience, professional, reliable and compassionate service. We've had 24-hour emergency service. So là, mon numéro, pas quitter rien bas ou dire, qui est 449-1800, 275-7564, 449-2100, or the emergency number 277-1800. If I keep it busy in Linus, that time is for you to breathe and grieve. Linus is not willing that any should die, but Zandra, you must go. So when you go with the best chaperone. Linus Funeral Home. Mama Tutu Famdi, si c'est pas Linus, il va venir à l'effet.
Our numbers are 449-1800, 449-2100, 275-7564, and 276-0400. Call Lyndhurst Funeral Home today.
Yes, and welcome back to Talk on the Block. We have just about 11 minutes left before we leave here, and so we're going to pack in as many questions as possible. So I will take maybe about 2-3 more calls before I call on Mr. Dr. Andre to give his closing remarks. So let's go back to telephone lines now. Good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Good afternoon, Sean, and good afternoon to Honorable Dr. Andre.
Thank you.
And my Honorable, not the Honorable you have that we in Dominica. My Honorable is $1 billion, Honorable Dr. Andre. And it's only for people like you. I'd like to thank you for coming on the program this afternoon to enlighten us. You're among one of the few professionals in Dominica that choose to brave the stormy weather of those bad tongues and come and enlighten us. I am in full agreement with your 18 or 20 point recommendation for electoral reform. Evenukale CHC report by Ron Bodlamela, Evenukale Bwili. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I see you have a fan there. Okay, let's go back to the telephone lines. Hello, good afternoon, caller. You're live. Caller, you're live on the overseas line. Okay, I think you're perhaps not paying attention. Let's go now to another call. Let's see. Good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Good afternoon, my brother. Good afternoon to you. First of all, yes, and I'm taking royalties from Dr. Andre. I'm calling the name I'm taking royalties from him. I won't charge you much, just about $4.something billion. I'm sure you know for that. First of all, I want to thank you, Sean and Dr. Andre. I find it interesting that the luminous luminary, and in his scintillating love letter reviewed to Dr. Skerrit, said that he was proposing ideas and positions that were new, and the Caribbean would be the envy of the other Caribbean countries, such as a national card rather than voter ID card. All over the world, in every other Caribbean country, they use voter ID card. I don't think they're going to change to international ID cards or national ID cards for voting. So I don't know where the Honorable Luminary was coming from with that proposal. And, strangely, he ignored all the hard work that was put into reviews of the election process by the OAS, by the CARICOM, by the Commonwealth Secretariat, and all the local organizations that put so much effort and energy into reviewing our political process, the electoral process. And then he comes up and says, well, this is the best thing that ever since bread and cheese was invented. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you, Dr. Henry and Sean. I hear the criticisms about your being a senator. That these are diversionary and, in my view, irrelevant stories. And I think the focus on electoral reform is important. But one person made a very important point. It's all very good to talk. It's always good to educate. It's always good to have nice conversations. But we have to take action to resolve the problem.
Thank you.
And the strategy is not involved. I have a petition, a petition asking on the government to review, rescind that proposal, that set of proposals from Byron. That's a good idea, a good start in my view.
Thank you, caller.
A proposal, a petition that can be signed by several thousands of Dominicans.
Thank you, caller. Dr. Andre, I think my final question to you really is, where do we go from here? Because we've had reports before. Well, we have the Dennis Byron report. You've come forward with some recommendations and proposals. Where do we go from here? Are these proposals from you are the final version? Are you going to put it in PDF format? And who are you going to send it to? The Electoral Commission, I'm not sure they're functioning. Who would you send that document to? Is it going to form the basis of the discussion on electoral reform going forward? Because, of course, the Labour Party and the government will take Byron's report. The proposals from you, really, what happens now?
Well, what happens now is simple. The consultations proposed by the Directorate is basically one desired to, in some fashion, confirm and to impose some degree of legitimacy to what Sir Byron has proposed. It seems to me that the patriots should organize themselves, and whether it's a matter of counter meetings, whether it's a matter of a counter narrative or a counter offensive, should organize and mobilize patriots in Dominica around the essential need for true electoral reforms, not what is being suggested as on Jabasak. The last caller is absolutely correct. I know him very well, Arundel Thomas. And just as an aside, this guy has been an educator for decades. He's retired now. Can you compare him to another well-known educator on another radio station? Bottom Brain or whatever.
Yes, yes.
Compare him to Arundel Thomas.
No comparison at all. No comparison.
You see what I'm saying to you?
Yeah.
So we have to harness that power within us. And bear in mind, those persons who are showing leadership, not people like myself, but persons we grow up thinking, garçon, they have nothing to offer. They have no societal standing. But they're the ones who are in the courage. And we have to mind that. We have to cultivate that yearning for righteousness and honesty and integrity, because that is what is going to unleash the power and the productive power of the Dominican people. Not
But
this
I'm saying, Dr. Andre, so what happened in terms of your document? Who are you going to send it to? I mean, it's on the internet.
Well, it has already been sent to various persons within the struggle. I was asked to probably tip the whole thing as opposed to a part of it which has been reproduced to certain persons. But I will see about doing that. And as I said, whatever small part I can play in bringing true democracy to Dominica, in bringing true freedom to Dominica, in ensuring that no persons are sidelined because of their political beliefs. Everyone receives a fair shot to build a hotel, not just some to sell passports, to build some wreck which is sinking below the sands, and some incomplete monstrosity that merely blights the landscape. Everyone should be given. How many passports has Suki been given? How many passports has Athi Mate been given to sell? How many passports has the Garaways been given to sell? No, it's a selective thing. And anyone who receives that privilege, they sing from the same hymn book. They have to. Mm-hmm. We have to reverse this sorry scheme of things entire.
Mm-hmm. But yes, I'm getting this message here, some messages on Facebook. The thing that baffles me is that email from Tony Asafan telling Skerrit about winning legacy. Like Skerrit is a big sportsman competing in table tennis, or the West Indies bringing win after win. I don't understand that. The man and his government was put there through thievery and treating, and you're telling him about winning legacy, like Dominica was willed to Skerrit, and Labour rats happy clapping to hear that idiots retired stupid sort macaque. I don't really understand all of it, but I think you got the essence of some of the messages coming in there on Facebook. I've been hearing for some time now, not just today but before. We've had discussions, we've had talk on the radio that the time really has come for action. You know, whether it's a campaign of civil disobedience, demonstrations, whatever it is, walks, whatever it is, but numbers, the boots on the ground. You need to really send a clear message to Mr. Skerrit that people are dissatisfied with what's going on, not happy with Byron's report, and there needs to be organized mobilization. People take to the streets to register their disgust about this report and where we are. What are your views on that, Dr. Andre?
Oh, absolutely. Words without actions are meaningless. I mean, it's clear. But it's not just a message to the political directorate, the Prime Minister. It's a message to the region. You see, because it's in the interest of the directorate to propagate the view that all is well in Dominica. The people are contented, they are happy, they're singing the right songs. We have to change that narrative, because it's not. It's Dominicans on the ground who are suffering, quite frankly. And it's important that Dominicans embrace a number of measures, peaceful, to make it clear that they will accept nothing more or nothing less than true electoral reforms, because their very lives depend on it. And this is not hyperbole. Their very lives depend on it. Whether they will get a job, whether they will stand aside while some foreign entity take over their space, which have been given to them, whether the national or the nature or the local or protected lands are given away to build hotels, and the hotels are passed on to another business entity.
Okay, I want to take one more call before we leave this afternoon. So the next caller, you're the last caller. It has to be very, very brief caller. Let's see here. Good afternoon, caller. You're live. You got 30 seconds, caller.
Hey, hi, Sean. Dr. Andrew, you made some points to the allegation. Actually, you made some statement that you have no evidence. Can you imagine me in front of your court saying to you, George, a partner tell me that, or Mr. tell me that? You said something about the Labour Party, and you have no solid evidence now. You go on day 6. Now, one more thing. You act like only Dominica alone that have, when it comes to people going out the boat. You know, the Haitians do that. They get money from the Jamaicans do that. And, you know, Grenada do that too. So, I mean, why are you making these big deals like that? But show me your evidence first. You can't, as a judge, tell me about a partner state, Labour Party do that, a partner state. Come on now.
Okay, thank you, caller. Thank you, caller.
Let me respond. Tell the fella I need no instructions or advice about hearsay. I'm saying it here, and that's the bottom line. What I am saying can be corroborated. There's evidence from different persons. Persons have openly talked about being paid, not just to come to Dominica, but to vote in particular constituency. So this fellow who's talking about hearsay, tell him, Google YouTube and go and find out what is the meaning of hearsay, because quite frankly, he's shown that he knows precious little about it. There is a preponderance of evidence concerning what has happened in these 3 electoral cycles. So for him to come up and say, well, Andre's talk is relying on hearsay, but in a sense, you're right, I'm saying it here. But you're absolutely wrong that there is no solid, corroborative, admissible evidence of this.
You got 30 seconds, Dr. Andre, to give your closing remarks.
But let me end on a more positive note. Again, sometimes when everything is lost, things change and change for the better. And certainly we only hope that that isn't the case with Dominica, because quite frankly, Dominica deserves much more. And that's why in the national anthem, you talk about Dominica so rich and rare. But if in fact we do all agree that Dominica is so rich and rare, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to preserve that richness and that rarity about this sacred landscape? And it lies within us to do so. Thank you very much to listeners, even those who have expressed questionable views. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. It was indeed a pleasure having you for the last 2 hours. It's indeed a real pleasure for me hosting for the last couple of days. Matt has agreed that I will come on tomorrow for my final program. And Lennox Linton, the president of the United Workers' Party, will come in from Monday. So I'll be here for my last program tomorrow on Talk on the Block. I'm very eager to be here. I've had a great week. I'm hoping that we can culminate with a great program tomorrow. So our next program here, they paid the Flow Hour.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, listeners, and good afternoon to everyone.